Caleb, I'm so glad that you are here with me to have a conversation.
Yeah.
You and I go back a ways. We particularly connected, when after the earthquake, 2010. And you've had nothing but my respect since then. I've known you first at a distance and then just got to do some things together. We went to Canada together, right? And recently reconnected when I got back from an overseas adventure, reconnected quickly with you at that conference. Have appreciated the times you and I have gone out to Starbucks and had a conversation. So here we are, we're having a conversation, and I want to just explain so people know why we're talking. Number one, our vision at Castle Church. We believe that revival is going to look like black, brown, white, all of us together, worshiping Jesus. The Bible says they will know that God loves them by the way we love each other. And so once we see that really begin to take root, not just diversity, but unity, I think it's going to be a powerful thing here in the city of Norwich. So I'm really excited about that. Our first value was we will worship Jesus among all races and ethnicities. Yeah. So the other thing is, as you and I have had some conversations recently, one of the things that has really stood out to me is how important it is for people in church, as we address issues of racial justice, to understand that it's not just an issue that they read about in USA Today or they see in the news or whatever. We're talking about people who are sitting in the same row as them and worshiping, lifting the same hands. Yeah. We don't want anybody worshiping Jesus with stones in their hands. We want dropping all those stones. And to do that, I think we need to understand each other's stories. So I just want to thank you again for taking the time. I really appreciate it. You know you got my respect. You're my brother. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Adam, I like to call you Adam, but you are the pastor of the church. As you said, we go way back. I definitely developed a tremendous level of respect for you when the earthquake in Haiti happened, because at that time, you and your group of leaders, you came down to our community, and you gave us a hug during a time when we were going through just a lot of emotional pain because of what had happened in Haiti. And it wasn't just, hey, I'm going to drop off some clothes to go to Haiti, here's a couple dollars. But I felt like what was so impressive was how you integrated and you guys started attending our revivals. You went to Haiti with the leaders of our church. You gave out food there. And then our youth group started to do a lot of collaborating on events. And I know that there were Haitian families in your church, but I don't really feel that it was only because you had Haitian families in your church that you did that. But this was just the heart of who you were. And at that point, because you had been so involved in our community, you understood the pains that a Haitian family was going through, and you could identify and speak to us. And I believe that that's something that I've continued to see in you. And we had this great vision of doing so much in Norwich. That's right. And I'll never forget when you said you were going to England and you had this grand old mission, and it sounded good. I was a little jealous. We were happy for you, and I was like, well, I wonder what's going to happen here for Norwich. And when you came back, and I was like, oh yes, he's back. So, but then at that time, my wife and I and our family were in a different place, and the Lord has moved some things, and it's just more than exciting to be working again with you, to be a part of this greater vision. And I do want to talk a little bit about what you said about Castle Church's mission and vision. What I like is that this mission and vision isn't only drawn, or this isn't coming as a result of current events, which is all of these killings of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and all of the things that has been happening. But this has always been the intention behind Castle Church. And it just so happens that while all of this is exploding, your heart was already in the right place. So God is able to use you as a way to speak to what this nation needs to hear, which is that, as a church, we have a responsibility to our brothers and our sisters, and it can't just be those who looks like us, and it can't be because we're trying, and we can't let that line stop when we're trying to preserve our rights.
So true. I love that. I love the way already we're talking about being a brother's keeper, which we went together through the Third Option course provided by the Rock Church out in San Diego, which we plan to unveil to the church in January and hopefully get some regional support and participation. Just backpedaling for 1 second about the Haitian community here in Norwich. I think it's important for those watching to understand the diversity in the city is beautiful. And the Bible actually says in Acts that he ordains where people are going to be geographically. And right here in the city, we have thousands of Haitian families. And that impact on our lives has been so beautiful. I've known the Haitian community to be very welcoming to me. And I find it a privilege and an honor to be part of their lives. They've blessed me as much as I know anything else. And so I think it's so true. We're on this same page together. I know the trip for us overseas didn't work out. We came back. There's a rebuild. And in that rebuild, I really did, behind the scenes, had been praying about you and Sam. And so this, to me, is really special. So the other day, when we were talking, the other week, right, we were talking about these different racial justice challenges that we have in this nation. I also noticed that pretty quickly you had shared a story on social media about a personal experience of yours. That personal experience, when I read it, really shook me. Because, why? Because I know you. Yeah. Knowing you brings that story home. Yeah. So I'm not just reading some abstract interaction with somebody out there. Now I know the stories. And I think, as a note here early, it's so important that as a church and as believers that we deeply commit ourselves to listening to other people's stories. Scripture actually says, don't just take interest in yourself, but take interest in other people. That's how we learn. That's how we're going to grow. Yeah. So I'm going to ask you now to kind of bring us back to that personal story that I think will be very appropriate for people to understand.
Sure. This wasn't a story that I planned on sharing. When I wrote that blog, it actually came as a result of my older sister reaching out and saying, "Come on, man! Like, you're not gonna say anything. You here you are. You're leading. You're running a business, and you're not talking about like your experience." And I was just like, well, I don't really have a platform, and that's how I felt. I don't feel, for me, I don't feel as if I am standing on a platform, but she said, it doesn't matter, like you need to speak, and you may not think you have a platform, but you're surrounded by people who are listening. And then I went through just like a personal event where I was amongst a group of folks, and I'm listening to them talk, and I'm like the only black guy there. Right. And they're talking about current events and like, oh, how this is going on, how like inconvenience it is this, these people are disobeying the law. And I'm listening, and nobody took the time to turn around and say, hey, Caleb, you're a black guy. Have you had that experience? Right. And I was like, whoa, I have an obligation, to my fellow brothers, my sisters, and those who are surround me, to let them know this is my story. And really, that's what it was. I shared that story for that purpose, and it turned out to be a lot more than I could have ever imagined. I think we've had like over 700 or 800 people read that actual blog. It's gotten reblogged and things like that. So I think that's pretty cool, but I never imagined it to be that impactful. I just wanted it so that the people that I was around, they knew that I have a story and you can't ignore it. And you can't try to dismiss all this that's going on, because this is my community and you may not see that, but this is my community and this is what we've been going through. And now that I'm a part of your community, there's a need to embrace me, because I'm embracing you. Embrace me, embrace my community. That's right. Because there's a bigger role that the church can play amongst this whole thing. And really the story started when I was a kid, growing up in a Haitian family. I just remember, as a kid, you just think the world is perfect. And my parents were trying to prepare me for the shock of the fact that I was a black person, although I was Haitian, but that my skin color is going to determine a lot of things that happens to me. And, you know, when they would tell me that, I just didn't believe. I'm like, blah, blah, blah. You know, my teachers loved me. My teacher was Caucasian, and I loved her. We still communicate to this day. Wonderful teacher, really responsible for helping me just grab this passion for math and numbers and things like that. And so my world wasn't racist. If there may have been racist people around me, but I was blind to that. I couldn't understand it. And my parents were trying to prepare me for that. So I really didn't believe that. And, but they said, just you watch. Your cousin, she's used to think the same thing. And now her eyes has been opened as a result of experiences that she's had. And so for me, it all came together on one night when we were going out to a fair in Brockton, Massachusetts, and pretty excited. You know, myself, 3 of my cousins, and my other 3 brothers and sisters were going out to this fair, and we get to the booth, and we start to buy tickets, and the woman. My father is asking a lot of questions of this woman who's selling the tickets, and she's just not liking these questions because my dad, he's not going to buy anything he doesn't understand. So he's asking multiple questions, and then she starts just addressing him differently. The attitude is starting to change, and he's like, "Excuse me, like I'm trying to buy tickets to go to the fair. This is not how you should be treating me." Curse words start flowing out of her mouth. And he's like, "No, this is not," and my dad's like, "No, this is not okay." And so she calls over the cops and she says, "This man is harassing and disrespecting me." And right away, the cops grabbed my dad, slammed him up against the fence. And he's like, "I have rights. What have I done?" And they're like, "Shut up. Stop talking." He's like, "I have done nothing wrong. Shut up, stop talking, shut up, stop talking." And then there's 3 of the cops, and then 2 of them are holding him up on the fence, and then one of them grabs like his nightstick and boom. And it's one of those expandable ones. So it just like boom, comes out like a lightsaber, and they're about to just take him down. And all of us are there as kids, and we're watching this unfold in front of us. And we just start bawling our eyes out. And then one of the cops there realized that the kids were watching him. And he said, "All right, hey, you know, the kids are over there." Thankfully, because of that, they did not do that. They threw him in the cop car and they took him off. So he had the car keys. You can imagine there was a lot of us. So we're at the location where the fair is, and we parked the car obviously near the fair, and he had the car keys, and now he's at the police station. And back then there was no such thing as cell phones, so it's not like we could call. And it's already late in the afternoon, so we had to walk a long way to go pick up my dad. And you know, nothing came out of those charges. Nothing came out of it. But like, it definitely scarred me. And I never forgot it. My cousins never forgot it. Our family has never forgotten that. And it's just terrible that we had to go through that. But just to see that the way my father was treated and shown as a man with no value. He's got a master's degree in teaching. He's very well respected in the community. He was a pastor of a church. So, yeah, it was a tough experience as a kid to go through.
It's painful to hear. Yeah. It's painful to hear because that's not long ago. Mm-hmm. First of all, how old were you when that took place? About?
Oh man, I was somewhere between 10 and 12 years old.
So we're talking how many years ago, approximately?
Come on, you're giving up my age.
I know, right? So it's all good.
So 13 years ago.
13 years ago.
Yeah. Well, no, not 13. 23 years
23. I'm giving up your age and your math right now, bro.
23 years ago, yeah.
But that's the scope.
Yeah.
We're not talking 1960s.
No.
Civil rights. We're not talking, deep in the middle of the city. Yeah. Talking about Brockton, Mass.
Yeah, and not for nothing, like people don't need my story to know what's going on in the Black community. You listen to any rap music from way back till now. We've been talking about this for a while, and people just keep dismissing it like it's nothing. Yeah, it's just amazing.
Did you recall that story once I think you said your sister challenged you, right? So was that story something you would from time to time think about, or did it come back in full force post George Floyd, and then when your sister said, hey, look, you got an accountability here, to speak, in other words?
They say that they say that like any episode that's traumatic, those things get burned into your memory, right? So like that's one way that people try to get you to learn how to remember things, like try to associate it with something traumatic, and you'll never forget. Like there's certain things I experienced as a kid, like, and I never forget those things, and like that was one of those things you just never forget. Like you just you go through life. It's not as if I was suffering because of it, but you definitely remember it. You definitely think about those things. And yeah, I mean, when my sister challenged me on not saying anything, and it just so happened that, I don't know, I was just driving, and I'm like, that's the story to share. That is the story to share, because like that is an example of what we just, we're not even talking about drug selling family or whatever. Not that the fact that someone sells drugs doesn't mean they don't have rights, or that their life shouldn't be valued, but we're talking about just a family that's living their normal lives, and it happened to us.
Yeah, so we have talked at the beginning about that verse in Isaiah where it says, it talks about standing up against injustice, and it says, working, really be kind to those who are oppressed, and it hits you with these verses. And at the beginning it says, learn to do right. And I was telling you how when I looked at that verse again recently, I backed way up to that first word. And the first word says learn. I put it in all caps in my notes, and I'm on a mission to learn. And that's why this is appropriate. And you telling your story is appropriate, because we're here to learn. When you learn, then you can take away some of the blindness or address the blindness. I'm curious to know what you're learning since George Floyd yourself. There's been an emotional connection. You have been passionate when we've talked. Yeah. What are some of the things you think you're learning that maybe wasn't front of mind even before, but now you're starting to really mull over and meditate on as you examine the scriptures and your own faith? So,
interestingly, everything that's happened, it hasn't really changed like the books that I've been reading or the areas of focus. Like I'm not going into scripture trying to find, what does God have to say about racism or people's value, because I know God sees human beings as valuable. I think if anything, it's just I've been torn with like just trying to understand God more and just say, okay, Lord, how can you use me? And just wanting to be a better Christian, because I don't want to be that guy who's only like, oh, hey, Black lives, and that's the only thing that I'm speaking about, because it's not just that, because like we have Chinese brothers and sisters who aren't getting the way that they're being treated is just wrong. Our people of Spanish descent, right? So it's just me. I've had to step back, Adam, and just look and see like what's going on inside of me. That's maybe I'm doing this as well, and I don't recognize that, and I want to get rid of those things. Because I mean, if anything, what I've learned is just how our Christian brothers and sisters are so unwilling to go into communities and love people. And instead, we're reading online articles when we can be in the people's homes who are suffering so that we can understand them. And I think that's, that reverts back to, I'm not trying to put you on a pedestal or anything, but that reverts back to when the earthquake happened, you didn't just send money and send clothes. You came to where we were. You understood our culture. You understood how we interacted with each other. And then you could finally speak into our culture. You could speak into our lives because you understood our pain. And what I've seen a lot of people try to dissect this whole thing from afar. And I'm like, you know what? If you were to just, when was the last time you went to a person of color's home to understand the challenges that they face? Yeah. Why don't you live amongst them? Then you'll really understand. And all of that right stuff, it goes out the window because now it's like, oh my gosh, I'm seeing what they're going through. I'm seeing their struggle. And what I expected, which was what Christ does, right? Which is he doesn't just stand on top of the mountain and preach. Yeah, he does preach, but then like the rest of the time he's living amongst them. He's having dinner with them. He's laughing with them. He's rebuking them, but he's doing it amongst them. And I'm like, hold on, like we have a church and we're preaching these awesome messages. We're praying these wonderful prayers and we're having all of these worship services. And we hear that there are people who are suffering and we're not there. Right. And I feel like that is a disappointment because forget about what's going on in the news. Just go there, live amongst them. And then all of that, it melts in the background.
It's incredibly powerful to point that out. You can't do this from behind a wall. You've got to get there. You've got to get to people. I had the privilege as a reporter at one point to just get to know people and to talk about the stories. And when you described that moment with the earthquake, what happened was at one point, as one example, kind of going off of what you just said, I remember Enoch was helping me as an interpreter as I was knocking on doors in Greenville. And we were just driving along and we were talking about one of the stories that quoted city hall officials, that said, we care about the Haitian community. We feel for them. We feel bad that they're going through this time after the earthquake. And Enoch looked at me and he said, that's nice. I never met anybody from City Hall. And suddenly, for me, the way I pictured it, it was like City Hall all of a sudden was on this top of the mountain. It felt so far away. And here we were going house to house in Greenville, and you're going into the homes. Mm-hmm. I had somebody, your former church, the Haitian church, I remember going in there, and as I was leaving, somebody tugged on my jacket and said, do you know any way I can get this news to somebody who I still don't know whether they're living or not? Mm. And until somebody's tugging on your jacket, until somebody is speaking to you. And like you said, where's the real work going to take place? The work is going to be taking place at dinner. Mm-hmm. I got to know you over more personal moments. And I think it is such a powerful thing. I think that's our passion for the church, is really what we're discovering is a self-segregation. Maybe there's no formal segregation, but self-segregation is basically you stick to your own circle, and if they think like you, look like you, act like you, that's your circle. And so when somebody outside the circle is hurting, you can't hear them hurting because all you can hear about is somebody else, and you end up in this echo chamber. And so the same people are telling each other, no, it's fine, it's not really that big of a deal, it's fine, it's not that big of a deal, until somebody like yourself was sitting in the room with them and they forgot to ask. And so I take so much from that idea that at the end of the day, you talk about all this stuff, read all this stuff, who are you having dinner with? You want to say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so, the Bible teaches us to love our enemies, right? And so it's amazing because politics has turned us to this place where if you're not on the same political side as me, you're my enemy, right? And let's just say that was the case. So-and-so is in a different political party, they have different political beliefs. They're part of Black Lives Matter, which supports, Democratic parties, whatever the case. But the Bible teaches you to love your enemies. And if that was the case, they are your enemies, they have different political agendas than you should still go and love on them. Right. And what I'm saying is, regardless of what our political stance is, we can't let politics get in the way of God's love. Right. And God's love requires that we go into where the people are hurting. And don't stand on a stage and preach to me when you don't know my pain. You haven't even bothered to come and find out what's really going on. And, I feel that, when you're listening to, and you listen to what excuses people make not to love others is just wrong. I think that we need to love others, and that means at times going and sitting at the dinner table so you can understand them. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So and you can only show how you care through action. It's not going to be through what you say. Your actions show that. And love is different for different folks. And it's not until you can start to be around them and you start to understand them, and you'll be able to show your love to them, and you can shine a light in their lives as well and illuminate and help them. And they'll help you too, because I know whenever I've read books about missionaries and things like that, they always talk about how when they go into a country, how much it does for them, and they're like, these folks are talking about how much I've done to help them, but in reality, they've helped me more than I've ever felt, and it's just that we are losing that opportunity as a church right now to love on a group of people that are hurting. And it may be this now, but in the future, there'll be other things. And we just need to always never forget that, our role is to love. Our role is not to protect rights and politics and stuff like that. That stuff isn't important. Christ didn't come and protect any of those things. He was defending God. He was defending God's love. Yeah. He was defending the purpose for God. He was breaking barriers. He was like, who cares about what this right says or what you believe this right is? This person's life is what's most important. And, we get blocked up in all this politics and we forget about God's love.
Self-preservation, when you live through self-preservation, you're going to miss the other. Jesus said, go to Samaria. When he said Samaria, it wasn't just an accidental geographical aside. Yeah. He said Samaria is where you don't like people. Yeah. Samaria is where people are different from you. Yeah. They're ethnically different. They have different religious kind of some of the stuff that we're supposedly lesser than. Mm-hmm. And he said that's where you're going to go. If the gospel's going to work, it's got to get through Samaria. Yeah. Now, you said, and I think this is a good way as we come closer to the end of this interview, you talked about the church. Mm-hmm. I think this is the most emotional part of it for me, and I think for you, I think it's a challenge to even talk about it. Yeah. But the idea of excuses, we have heard everything. All the excuses that people make that dodge the issue. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I feel like people in church make it complicated, and they go down the route of complicated explanations for why, really, at the end of the day, they're not in the middle of people's pain. And I think those excuses you see throughout the pages of Scripture from the Pharisees, when they asked the question, who's my neighbor? Mm-hmm. Then the question wasn't, because I really can't wait to do this. The question was, I think I can excuse myself from the responsibility that it takes to go and love people. And Jesus didn't give them any room to make any excuses. So the church is where we're really, and I love the church. This is God's plan. I love local church. I love the church across the country. But I believe in America we have a challenge and a problem that really this is where God's moving. And it's deep. It's a deep work. And I think if the church could get to this point where we understand racial justice, where we understand how to love people who are different from ourselves, maybe it's going to start to look differently. What are your thoughts about how the church could be, should be, what could be saying, should be saying, or whatever it has to do from your heart.
So, we can talk about the church in America, or like, or the white evangelical church, really, which is what you're talking about. I think God's church is exactly where it needs to be, meaning God's church is doing what it needs to be doing. And I just think some people aren't on that bandwagon right now, and that's just it. And, God uses, he's awesome because he's used this time to do a lot of revealing.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's a lot of unveiling, and you're looking behind the curtains and you're like, oh, wow, I didn't realize this was going on. Maybe you had an inkling, you're like, something wasn't right and you just couldn't put a finger on it. And he's just used this opportunity to just unveil a lot of stuff. And I mean, for me personally, when I see it, it pains me because I don't like to be on the quote unquote losing side. So I see it as, oh no, God's church is losing, but he's not losing. He knows exactly what he's doing. And, he's unveiling. He knows that, okay, I got to tear some stuff down to build some stuff up. Right. And so as he's unveiling, and, we're worried about God's reputation, the church's reputation. God is not worried about that stuff. Mm-hmm. He's like, I know what I'm doing. Like, he's up at heaven and he's laughing, right? He's like, no, I know what I'm doing. And so I think that I find comfort in knowing that God knows what he's doing. And he's been doing this for a lot longer than I've been alive. And he's doing pretty good, right?
Yeah, right.
So I think that I'm excited in reality because although everything that's going on is something that, we can talk about could cause despair or depression, or feel as if the church is gonna disappear. God is just, I love that. He's laying the foundations for something even stronger. And I believe that there's a generation. I'm not saying that it's a new generation, like a younger generation. I'm just saying that there's a generation of Christians that are like, I'm fed up. I'm not living that life, and I'm not buying into that crap. Right. And we're going to do this the right way. And we have a role we're going to love, and we're going to love really hard. And I'm not going to be caught up in this politics and let that agenda drive my decisions. Mm-hmm. My decisions is coming out of God's word. And so I think that you have leaders also who's going to be coming out of this. I mean, even right here in this church, you're seeing leaders emerge as a result of the pressure of the situation. I agree. And I think that's what happens, like in a time of where pressure and where there's turmoil and there's pain and there's perplexion and people are confused, leaders start to rise up, not because they intended on, but they're like, somebody needs to do something. That's right. And so out of all of this, he's doing something really beautiful. And I can't wait. If I get to see it, I'll be really happy. Mm-hmm. But if it's something that comes a generation after me, I'll be glad to know that I had a small piece to do with that. So I'm not worried about the church, God's church, because that's not my business to worry about anyways. What I need to worry about is how my relationship with him is, and also, am I in the right place? Am I listening? Am I doing what he's asking me to do? I think that's our responsibility as Christians, and the rest is up to him, and he'll take care of his own business.
I agree. I think that's so well said. That's why I feel hopeful, because I talked the other week about the gift of an enemy. And sometimes when you see the opposition, or you see the area, and honestly, among the white evangelical church, it represents something, I believe, when you look at all the polls and all the statistics, and that particular segment of our society in America has been very strong against resisting this move of racial justice in many different ways. You can put it in different language, but that's the case. But I think sometimes that clarifies what needs to emerge out of it. And God just purifies his church. He raises up leaders. They've got a fire. They want more authentic. When you see, it's like God paints a picture and he uses the shadows and the light. And when you realize that the shadow isn't good for what you're working on, that masterpiece, you got to focus more and more on the light. And I think emerging into the light are these leaders, voices that have something to say. They know a real living God. It's not like God, like you said, has changed. He's the same God today as he always has been and always will be. There's been evil since the beginning in that garden, sin since the beginning in that garden. He's still the answer. And I think he's equipping young leaders to emerge, and new generation voices, and out of the shadows, voices that have been there to address this. And I think that's so well put. I want people to know you have a beautiful family. Your wife, Sam, preached here at the church just the other week, and she did a fantastic job. I'll go easy on trying to get her back up here, you know what I'm saying?
Keep pushing her.
Yeah, okay. And your children, and what you do in the community as a business leader. You're a leader. Your sphere of influence is highly impactful. I have nothing but respect for you, Caleb. Appreciate you. You said a lot of stuff here I think that people will be able to think on, reflect on. That's my prayer, is that these interviews, the first of what I believe will be an occasional series, these conversations, I would encourage you, keep talking, man. You have something to say. And as you speak, that's going to bring more light on the truth, because you speak with truth and grace. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Pastor Adam. Well, I'll do a Pastor Adam for the sake of the interview, but thank you, Adam, because what I would say is that you're walking a path that not many pastors are willing to walk, especially as a Caucasian man yourself. And I'm pretty sure it's a lonely path. We've talked about it. It is a lonely path because silence, when your colleagues are silent and you're talking and you're thinking, it's like you thought you were all running the same road together, and you look back and they're like, no, we're not going in that direction, and they're just letting you run on your own. And it's like, am I running the right path? Or, hey, there's no warm family to embrace me and surround me. And so it's a lonely path, and there's definitely struggles. But like that's the walk of a leader. There are times as a leader you need to be willing to walk a path alone because it's the right path. And so, and I'm not saying it because you speak about racial injustice. I'm saying it because you are willing to walk the path that the Lord asks us to walk. And racial injustice falls under that umbrella. That's one of the few things, because there will be other things that come, Pastor Adam, that it's not going to be about racial injustice. It'll be about something else. But because you're walking that path, those things will fall underneath naturally as well. So there's no agenda to protect your rights. The agenda is to do God's work. And that is the most important thing that you need as a leader, as someone who represents God's church, as someone who's supposed to represent the love of God, right? For the love of God, can we just do that? And I feel like with you, I'm not saying you're perfect or that you got it all right, but that's there. And, that is an important foundational piece. Yeah. So thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.